For our 10th anniversary, I wanted to make it special. A decade of marriage deserved more than the usual dinner at a nice restaurant or a weekend at a cozy cabin. I wanted something unforgettable, something that would remind Jessica of how much we had built together, of the love we once shared. So, I planned the perfect surprise, a luxurious trip to Bali, first-class flights, a private villa with an infinity pool overlooking the ocean, everything down to the finest details. I had been working late at the office one night, finalizing the bookings, when I realized I needed her passport details. The drawer in our bedroom was where she always kept it, buried under a mess of old receipts, expired credit cards, and useless warranty papers. I sifted through them, my fingers grazing the leather cover of her passport, when something else caught my eye, a crisp, neatly folded printout. At first, I assumed it was just an old itinerary from one of our previous trips, something she had forgotten to throw away. But as I unfolded it, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. 2 one-way tickets to Bali. Departure in 2 days. First class. But there was no mention of me. Then, I saw the names, Jessica Carter, and Chris Mendez. The room felt colder. The air heavier. I read it again, slower this time, my mind refusing to process what was in front of me. Chris. That name wasn't unfamiliar. He had come up in casual conversation before, always mentioned dismissively, always framed as a harmless work friend, a gym buddy, someone Jessica barely paid attention to. But I wasn't stupid. I had noticed the way she smirked when his name slipped into conversations, the extra time spent on her appearance before work events, the sudden interest in fitness when, for years, she had sworn she had no patience for it. I had even asked her about it once, just a few months ago. "You're overthinking." That was her response. She laughed, rolled her eyes, pressed a hand to my chest, and called me paranoid. And I believed her. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the paper, my hands shaking. The betrayal was right there, printed in black and white. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It wasn't a gut feeling or a nagging doubt. It was proof. The rage came fast and sharp, flooding my veins, setting my teeth on edge. She had been planning this while sleeping beside me. Lying to my face. Kissing me in the mornings before heading off to plan a romantic escape with someone else. I wanted to storm downstairs, grab my phone, call her, demand an explanation. Why? When did it start? Was it ever real for her? But even as fury burned through me, something inside me held back. A different emotion. Clarity. This wasn't just an affair. This was premeditated. She had spent months not just cheating, but crafting a future where I wasn't in the picture. She had 1 foot out the door already. That realization hit harder than the betrayal itself. I had been working late nights, picking up extra projects, planning this anniversary trip, thinking we were just in a rough patch, that maybe life had gotten in the way, that love was still there, waiting to be revived. Meanwhile, she had been pulling away, withdrawing piece by piece, all while keeping me around as insurance. I clenched the itinerary in my fist, crushing the paper as I forced myself to breathe. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a dramatic confrontation. Not yet. She had been playing a long game, moving in secret, making calculated decisions while I walked around blindly, assuming we were still us. No more. I opened my laptop, heart still hammering in my chest, and pulled up my flight confirmation. It took less than 10 minutes to cancel my original booking. Another 15 to reroute her tickets. A few extra clicks, and suddenly, Jessica and Chris weren't flying to Bali anymore. They were going somewhere much, much worse. I leaned back in my chair, the remnants of my fury settling into something colder. Something more satisfying. She thought she had outplayed me. But the game had just begun. The satisfaction of clicking that final confirmation button was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It was as if the anger, the humiliation, and the raw ache of betrayal had all condensed into something far more powerful: control. Jessica and Chris were still going on their little trip. Just not to Bali. Instead, they were now booked on a flight to Savu, a remote island in Indonesia, a place that had little more than a few rundown hostels, no high-end resorts, and barely any cell service. No luxury. No candlelit dinners on the beach. No infinity pools or champagne breakfasts. Just heat, humidity, and miles of untamed wilderness. I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly. The first part of my plan was complete. Now, I just needed to make sure it all played out exactly as intended. The next morning, I woke up before Jessica, staring at the ceiling as I listened to her slow, steady breathing beside me. The woman I had spent a decade building a life with. The woman who had kissed me goodnight, told me she loved me, all while making plans to run off with someone else. She stirred slightly, shifting closer in her sleep, and I had to fight back the bitter laugh threatening to rise in my throat. She had no idea. Sliding out of bed, I made my way downstairs, my mind already running through my next move. The flights were handled, but there was still the issue of their luggage. If they arrived on the island and had everything they needed, they'd just book another flight out as soon as they realized the mistake. I couldn't allow that. Thankfully, I had contacts. One of the benefits of working as an engineer in the aviation industry was knowing the right people. A few well-placed calls, a little cash exchanged under the table, and Jessica and Chris's bags were no longer heading to their final destination. They were now scheduled to take an unexpected detour, a completely different airport, hundreds of miles away. That meant no extra clothes, no toiletries, no credit cards safely stashed in their checked baggage. Just whatever they had in their carry-ons. Perfect. At breakfast, Jessica was all smiles and casual indifference. She scrolled through her phone, barely glancing up as I sat across from her, sipping my coffee. The deception was almost insulting. She thought she had it all figured out, how to keep me clueless, how to slip away undetected, how to cheat and still come home to a comfortable life. I almost wanted to let her know. To watch the confidence drain from her face, to see her realize that she wasn't the one in control. But I had a role to play, too. So, I leaned back in my chair, pretending to be distracted with work. I even threw in an irritated sigh here and there, shaking my head at my phone screen as if dealing with some frustrating emails. She didn't even question it. She never had to. By the afternoon, I suddenly remembered an emergency meeting at the office and told her I'd be home late. I made sure to sound just the right amount of stressed, just the right amount of apologetic. And, as expected, she barely reacted. She wanted me out of the house. By the time I returned that evening, her bags were already by the door, neatly packed and ready for her romantic escape. The sight of them sent a fresh wave of disgust through me, but I swallowed it down, shoving my hands in my pockets to keep myself from doing something impulsive. Jessica greeted me with a casual smile, the kind of smile that made it seem like nothing was wrong. Like she wasn't about to leave me behind for someone else. I responded in kind. She wasn't the only one who could lie. That night, I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling again. The hours passed slowly, my mind running through every detail, every possible outcome. Would she call me when she landed? Probably not. She'd be too busy getting lost in her little fantasy with Chris. Would she even think of me at all? Maybe in passing. Maybe when she needed a convenient excuse. It didn't matter. What mattered was that, by tomorrow, everything would change. The morning of her flight, I kissed her goodbye. A long, lingering kiss. One final act of deception. She had no idea that this was the last time she would ever see me as the fool she thought I was. As she walked out the door, rolling her suitcase behind her, I stood by the window and watched. Watched her get into the car. Watched as she pulled away. Watched as the woman I had loved for 10 years drove off, believing she had outsmarted me. I let out a slow breath, feeling something in my chest finally unclench. She was gone. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait. The beauty of a well-executed plan is the moment when realization sets in. The exact second when everything shifts, when the liar realizes they've been played. I imagined that moment as I sat in my quiet, empty house, sipping coffee from the same mug Jessica had used that morning. By now, they had landed. And I knew, without a doubt, that reality was crashing down around them. Thousands of miles away, Jessica must have been glowing with excitement as she stepped off the plane, ready to sink into her perfect fantasy. A tropical breeze, a cocktail in hand, Chris by her side, it was supposed to be paradise. Instead, she walked straight into hell. The moment they exited the plane, the first thing she would have noticed was the airport. If it could even be called that. No luxury lounges, no sleek, modern terminals. Just a crumbling concrete structure, barely functional, with flickering lights and a few tired-looking locals milling around. The heat would have hit next, thick, suffocating, nothing like the pleasant ocean breeze she had imagined. And then, the smell, a mix of salt, sweat, and something distinctly unpleasant. I imagined how long it took for the panic to set in. Maybe at first, she assumed there had been a mistake. Maybe she even laughed nervously, telling Chris that they'd just gotten off at the wrong stop. But the confusion turned to horror the moment they saw the airport signage. Savu. Not Bali. Not even close. Their bags, of course, were nowhere to be found. Their neatly packed designer luggage filled with vacation outfits, toiletries, and all the essentials. Gone. They were left with only their carry-ons, whatever they had crammed into their bags at the last minute. Jessica must have gone straight to the nearest airline desk, demanding answers, only to be met with blank stares from employees who barely spoke English. She would have fished out her phone then, frantically searching for a signal. But Savu wasn't the kind of place built for modern luxuries. No service. No Wi-Fi. No escape. Chris, undoubtedly, would have been losing it. The hot-headed, self-absorbed gym bro with his carefully gelled hair and expensive sneakers now trapped in a sweltering, unforgiving wasteland. He wasn't built for discomfort, not the type to handle real problems. Jessica must have been regretting everything by then. Regretting leaving me. Regretting trusting Chris. Regretting ever stepping on that plane. And then, just as desperation clawed its way into her throat, she must have seen it, one bar of reception. A weak, flickering lifeline. She would have called the only person who could fix it. The only person whose number she knew by heart. Me. My phone rang, vibrating against the wooden table beside me. I let it ring once. Twice. 3 times. Then, I picked up. Silence at first. The kind of silence that isn't really silence at all, filled with ragged breathing, the sound of wind rushing against the speaker, the distant murmur of panicked voices in the background. Then, her voice, frantic, desperate, edged with the realization that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself the briefest of smiles. She thought she had outplayed me. But now, she knew the truth. She had never stood a chance. Jessica's voice came through the phone, sharp and panicked, layered with disbelief and barely contained fury. I imagined her standing there, sweat glistening on her skin, humidity pressing against her like a suffocating blanket, her perfectly planned escape crumbling around her. She wanted answers. She wanted explanations. She wanted me to fix it. Instead, I simply let a slow breath pass through my lips before delivering the final blow. Hope you enjoy the surprise. You're going to have plenty of time to think about your choices. And then, without another word, I hung up. I stared at the phone for a moment, letting the silence settle, imagining the chaos that must have erupted on her end. The moment when the truth fully sank in. She was stranded. With him. No 5-star resorts, no luxurious beachside dinners, no carefully curated romantic getaway. Just mosquitoes, unbearable heat, and the slow, crushing realization that she had been played. A decade of betrayal wrapped neatly into a single, merciless checkmate. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. It was done. Now, all I had to do was wait. For 2 whole days, they remained trapped. Jessica and Chris must have scoured the area, searching for a way out. But Savu wasn't the kind of place where you could just hop on a quick connecting flight. The small airport had barely any outgoing flights, and with their luggage rerouted halfway across the country, they had little to work with. Chris, undoubtedly, would have been losing his mind. No protein shakes. No gym. No escape. His entire carefully crafted image, the confident, charming entrepreneur Jessica had fallen for, was unraveling by the hour. He wasn't a problem solver. He wasn't a provider. He wasn't the type to step up when things got hard. And Jessica, for the first time, was seeing it. The cracks in her fantasy. The reality of what she had thrown her life away for. I imagine the second day was when it truly hit her, when she must have sat down in whatever pathetic excuse for a hotel they had found, staring at the peeling paint on the walls, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. She had traded a stable life, a loyal husband, a home filled with warmth and security, for this. A lie. When desperation finally drove them to bribe a local fisherman, I could only imagine what that final boat ride must have been like, Jessica sitting in silence, her expensive vacation dress wrinkled and stained, her carefully styled hair a tangled mess. Chris sulking, his bravado completely shattered. By the time they reached civilization, they probably thought the worst was over. But they had no idea what was waiting for them back home. By the time Jessica set foot in the city again, she no longer had a home to return to. I had spent those 2 days wisely. First, I moved out. Not just the usual leaving with a suitcase kind of move out, I took everything that was mine. Every piece of furniture I had bought, every expensive kitchen appliance she had insisted on but never used, every last thing that had any connection to me. The house, the one she had so arrogantly believed was hers to do with as she pleased, was now just an empty shell. But I didn't stop there. Next, I went to the bank. Every shared account, every joint investment, every last bit of money that was legally under my name. Gone. Drained. Redirected. Locked away where she couldn't touch it. Jessica had never worried about money. She always had me to handle it. Always had me to make sure the bills were paid, the vacations were booked, the luxuries were within reach. Now. She had nothing. No safety net. No backup plan. No one to clean up her mess. But the final touch was my favorite part. I made sure everyone knew. Not in some dramatic, confrontational way, I didn't need to scream the truth. I let the evidence do that for me. Before she even landed back in the country, a neat, professionally assembled package had already made its way to her workplace. Emails. Photos. Screenshots of her cheating, her lies, her deceit, all wrapped up in an airtight, undeniable presentation. Her colleagues, the same people she had spent years boasting to about her perfect marriage, now knew exactly what kind of person she really was. Her family knew too. Her parents, her siblings, even the distant relatives she only spoke to on holidays, all of them had received a polite, matter-of-fact message detailing her actions. Not angry. Not vindictive. Just the truth. Because that was the thing about people like Jessica, they thrive on perception. They craft illusions, build facades, convince everyone around them that they are admirable, flawless, deserving of admiration. But when you strip that away, when you shine an unforgiving light on what they really are, they crumble. And that's exactly what she did. I imagine the moment she stepped into what used to be our home, expecting comfort, expecting normalcy, only to find emptiness. No furniture. No warmth. No carefully curated life waiting for her return. Just four walls and the consequences of her choices. Maybe she called me. Maybe she stood there, staring at the nothingness, waiting for an answer that would never come. It didn't matter. By then, I was already gone. Not just from the house. Not just from the city. But from her life. The way I saw it, I had given Jessica exactly what she wanted. She wanted freedom. She got it. She wanted a life without me. She got that, too. But most importantly, she wanted to make a fool of me. And instead, she was the one left standing in ruins. I closed my eyes, leaning back into my seat, letting out a slow, satisfied breath. Checkmate. Jessica must have spent hours sitting in the middle of that empty house, surrounded by nothing but the ghosts of her choices. No furniture. No neatly organized bills, paid on time. No husband waiting with open arms, ready to forgive. Just silence. I imagined how long it took before the full weight of it crashed down on her. The moment she realized that this wasn't just a fight, not just some mistake she could smooth over with pretty words and empty promises. This was final. And then, of course, came the calls. First, just a few. A hesitant message. A timid attempt to see if maybe, just maybe, I would respond. Then, when those went unanswered, the real desperation set in. Missed calls. Voicemails. Text after text, each one dripping with more frantic emotion than the last. Tom, I made a mistake. Please, can we just talk? I don't even care about the house, I just need to see you. You can't just disappear like this. It was almost laughable. I was the one who disappeared. She had spent months sneaking around, lying to my face, planning a life that didn't include me. She had disappeared long before I did. But now that she had nothing left, she wanted to come back. It wasn't love. It wasn't regret. It was survival. Jessica had always been the type to land on her feet, to charm and manipulate her way out of any bad situation. She was used to having a safety net, a backup plan. She had thought she could do the same with me. But this time, there was no net. I ignored every single call. I let her sit in the wreckage of her own making, drowning in the consequences she had never expected to face. And when she finally showed up in person, standing at my new doorstep, eyes red, makeup smudged, voice trembling with carefully rehearsed sorrow, I watched her. Unmoved. Because that was the thing about people like Jessica. The tears were never for what they had done. The apologies were never for the betrayal itself. They were for getting caught. She wanted to talk. She wanted to explain. But there was nothing she could say that I hadn't already seen with my own eyes. I let her talk. I let her plead, reminisce, grasp for something, anything, that could rewind time. And when she finally stopped, when she ran out of excuses and manipulations and the last vestiges of dignity, I simply stepped back, shut the door, and locked it. For good. Chris, of course, had been the first to run. The moment they got back, the moment the reality of their situation became clear, he did what all cowards do. He vanished. Jessica had never been his priority. He had seen her as a stepping stone, a convenient source of money and luxury, a woman who had everything and was willing to throw it away for him. But once she had nothing, he was gone. No calls. No messages. No grand declarations of love. Just silence. I wondered how long it took for Jessica to realize she had been played, just like she had tried to play me. Poetic justice. The divorce was swift. I had already set everything in motion before she even returned, ensuring that every document, every financial asset, every legal detail was airtight. There was no fight. No messy courtroom battles. No drawn-out debates over who got what. Because I already had everything. The house. Mine. The savings. Mine. The retirement accounts, the stocks, the joint investments. Mine. Everything Jessica had taken for granted, everything she had so effortlessly dismissed when she thought she was trading up. Gone. And her? She walked away with nothing. No home. No security. No carefully curated life. Just the weight of her own mistakes. I didn't check in to see where she ended up. I didn't care. I imagined she was still trying to spin the narrative, still telling sob stories to anyone who would listen, still trying to paint herself as the victim. But the thing about reputation, once it's shattered, it never quite returns to what it was. She had spent years building an image of the perfect wife, the loving partner, the woman who had it all. Now, she was just another cautionary tale. 2 weeks after everything was finalized, I stood in the airport, watching the departures board. The trip to Bali, the real one, the one I had planned months ago, was finally happening. Only this time, it wasn't for her. It was for me. As I boarded the plane, a sense of clarity settled over me. For so long, I had been consumed by the betrayal, the anger, the need to make things right. And I had. Jessica had made her choice. And I had made mine. As the plane took off, as the city faded beneath me, I allowed myself a small smile. Because for the first time in a long time, I was free.